Gandhi once said, "I like your Christ, I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ. Show me a Christian who lives like Christ, and I will convert." The sad thing is he never converted. There were no Christians whose lives inspired him to convert. He couldn't find anyone who was Christ-like. Now, I wonder if sometimes as Catholics we fall into the spectator role with our faith. Like being at a football game, we may identify more with the fans watching in the stands rather than the people on the field. The Second Vatican Council, it was aware of this mentality. It emphasized active participation in the liturgy. The document Sacrosanctum Concilium, it said, "Mother Church earnestly desires that all the faithful should be led to that full, conscious, and active participation in liturgical celebrations, which is demanded by the very nature of the liturgy. Such participation by the Christian people as a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a redeemed people, is their right and duty by reason of their baptism." What this tells us is that in the liturgy, we're not just the fans or the spectators, but we're people on the field called to actively participate in the liturgy. At our baptism, we are incorporated into Christ as priest, prophet, and king. And so in this liturgy, we all have a role to play. We should all be actively praying the prayers and the responses and offering ourselves along with Christ on this altar. Now, I'm not sure if it was the council's intent with the statement I just read, but I'd like to argue that our active participation has to go even further than just here in the Mass. The Mass, it has to become part of our lives. We go forth to share what we've been given with others. And this seems to be the message in our gospel today. Jesus said to his disciples, "You are the salt of the earth." Now, we know that salt, when you use it for cooking, it seasons things. It gives it flavor. It's also used to preserve things from corruption, like food that's packed with salt in order to keep it from spoiling. Well, as Christians, as the salt of the earth, we're meant to divinely season the world and preserve it from corruption by proclaiming the gospel. And one way we can do this is by offering and consecrating ourselves. And this is something that we actually learn at the Mass. In a few minutes, we'll have the offertory, where the bread and wine will be brought forth. They're the fruits of the earth. And we'll offer them to God so that they can be transformed into His Son. It's the very gifts that God gave us that we offer to Him in order to become His Son. Well, in a similar way, each of us can offer ourselves to God. We become an offertory by offering Him the gift of our lives. We offer what He's given us back to Him. Now, after the offertory, we have the consecration, where the bread and wine are transformed into the body and blood of Christ. And I was reading a book the other day that spoke about how the offering for us is the easy part. The difficult part is the consecration. It said, "The real sign, the real proof that you have given yourself is when the gift goes on to sacrifice. It's when you sacrifice in deeds and not just in words, your time and your life." And that's what we always see on the altar at Mass. We see Jesus sacrifice Himself for us. And each of us are called to participate in this sacrifice by offering our time and our life to share His cross. That same author from that book, he goes on to say that to live the consecration of Mass, we must effect in ourselves two movements. We must die to self, empty ourselves, and we must fill ourselves with Jesus to overflowing. What the consecration at the Mass does to the bread, our mystical consecration should, in a certain manner, produce in us. He says a change must take place in our lives. We must become other Christ. And when the celebrant whispers those words over the bread, "This is my body," everything disappears except the appearances of bread. And so we too, just like that, must disappear. Now, obviously not all at once, but little, by degrees, until it's no longer I that live, but Christ who lives in me. And if you think about that, that's kind of a hard thing to do, to die to ourselves. The Israelites, they struggled with this in our first reading. Just before this reading, they're complaining because they fast, but the Lord doesn't take any notice of it. And the reason is because they fast for their own pleasure. Scripture says that they fast only to quarrel, to fight, and to hit with wicked fists. But through Isaiah, God calls them to make a true sacrifice by thinking of others. He says, sharing your bread with the hungry, sheltering the oppressed and the homeless, clothing the naked. Basically, it's practicing the works of mercy. Now, some of us may already be doing this. There's probably not a parent in here who hasn't lost sleep to take care of a sick child. And there's also some in here who have probably been treated bad by others, but like Jesus, they remained silent and prayed for them. Well, through that silence and prayer, you've practiced the spiritual works of mercy of bearing wrong patiently and praying for the living. And this kind of shows us that dying to ourselves, it doesn't have to be the great things like martyrdom, but it can be the little everyday things. If you look at the list of the spiritual and corporal works of mercy, they're really a lot simpler than you'd think. Some of us may not have the means to go out to like a soup kitchen or visit the imprisoned, but we can always practice the spiritual works, and those are as simple as praying for the living and the dead. And these little works of mercy, these little daily sacrifices that we make for God and others each day, well, those are the real signs and proof that we've given ourselves to God. And now is the time to do it. Because in the grand scheme of things, the time we've been given here, it's very short. When we have to make the most of it by transforming even the smallest everyday things into acts of love for God, by offering and consecrating ourselves to Him so that Christ can live in us and through us. St. Catherine of Siena, I'll leave you with this. She once said that she was speaking about this life here on earth, and she said, "It's not the hour to seek oneself for oneself, nor to flee pains in order to possess consolations. No, it is the hour to lose oneself."